an affair, which he wasn't.
What do you think was going on with Nicole? Simply that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. In other words, he was a waiter at a restaurant. Nicole goes there to eat. Her mother leaves her glasses at the restaurant. Your brother brings the glasses to the house. And at that point, your theory is that O.J. was in the middle of committing a murder, that he was killing Nicole.
Yep. Your
brother walks in on them.
I don't know that I think he was killing her yet, but he was beating her or hitting her because she has marks that support that evidence. And there is testimony of someone yelling, "Hey, hey, hey," which we believe was my brother coming up onto something and seeing some kind of...
He could have run.
He could have run.
But he attempted to stop whatever the hell was going on there. And that's what did him in.
And so the evidence shows that my brother was killed first because his blood was found on Nicole. And there was no blood of Nicole on my brother. So if you follow the pattern, and she had a contusion on the back of her head, which they felt was when he pushed her and she hit her head on the step.
So the evidence seemed to support your brother being killed first by the killer.
Right.
And
then he went back and killed her and nearly decapitated her.
Jesus.
And if you also believe the evidence, which I do, my brother was probably alive for about a minute.
Yeah, you said that the last thing that he probably saw was this murdering maniac walking away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I see him on Twitter, that's what I keep thinking of.
And he put up a fight too because he had defensive stab wounds. So they knew he was putting up a fight.
Yeah, my brother was stabbed over 30 times.
Jesus. Unbelievable. And you didn't even know who O.J. was. You had never heard of this guy. You weren't a sports fan. You didn't know anything about it.
Nothing.
And you didn't know it was your brother until like a day later. How does that happen?
Well, so the murders happened on June 12th. The news broke on June 13th. And we weren't notified until around 5, like right around 5 o'clock on that Monday.
Who'd they call, your dad?
Yeah. Well, they called the house. It's just kind of a silly story. They'd been calling, once they figured out who my brother was, they needed to make a notification to be able to say publicly who he was, but nobody was home. And so there was a couple of messages from my brother's manager at Mezzaluna at the time. And when Patty, my stepmom, came home from taking the kids to school or whatever it was that she was doing, she heard all these messages and she's like, why is this guy calling the house? My brother didn't live there at the time. And then she finally talked to I think it was Gary, I think his name was, said, I was just checking because Ron didn't show up to work today. And she said, yeah, okay. Well, do you know where he is? No, he doesn't live here. And he said, well, you're his emergency contact. And she said, well, is there an emergency? Oh, he's not here. I don't have any idea why he didn't show up for work. And then about 30 seconds later, the phone rang and it was Claudia Ratcliffe from the coroner's office who said, is this Patty Goldman? Yes. Is Ron Goldman your son? Yes. Did you hear anything on the news today about Nicole Brown? No. She's like, what is happening here? And she's listening to this conversation with the coroner. And then she says, well, your son was the other victim. And she was not understanding what was being told to her. And literally at that second, my dad came in from the garage. He was a salesman at the time and was home early and walked in and she was yelling, Fred, 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 there's something wrong with Ron. And my dad got on the phone and they repeated the same story. But my dad had been listening to the news all day long. And so he had heard everything that had happened and heard them say there was another identified male. And so when she said your son was the other victim,
that's when the world starts to fall apart. Yeah.
And then he said, do I have to identify the body? And they said no. And then
no,
because they already had they had his ID, and then there was somebody else at the scene, which was the guy that had been calling us all day. He identified my brother. And so I was living in San Francisco, and I too had seen it on the news that day. Not as much up in San Francisco as it was in Los Angeles. I was in the break room at Wells Fargo where I worked, and I saw the bodies being wheeled away, just watching, not even really understanding what I was watching. And then when I got home from work that night around 6:30.
Your father called you?
Yeah.
And he broke the news to you?
Yeah. And he told my boyfriend at the time first to make sure that he was with me when I got home so that he could be there to support me. And so when I came in the door, Joe was looking all weird. And, I feel terrible at the time because I didn't know what he was enduring. But he knew what he was about to
deal with.
Yeah.
You believe in the death penalty?
I do.
Yeah.
I didn't I didn't, because I'm, psych major, and I feel like everybody has a chance to be rehabilitated, and I don't anymore.
You would love to have seen. Wasn't there some weird coincidence where after OJ got off that you were driving your car somewhere or something and you saw OJ?
Yeah.
And you thought about hitting him, right?
Yeah, I was in a parking lot. I can't tell you exactly where I was. I remember everything about the parking lot. I just don't remember it, like somewhere in Los Angeles.
But there he was.
And there he was. He was walking across the parking lot. I remember that gait, like that step.
Confident.
And just the way he walked, and he had like it would dip a little when he walked. And I for 9 and 10 months, I studied the back of his head. I knew everything. And I saw him walking. I thought, oh my God, I could take him out right here. Nobody would know. There's nobody around. And I remember like white knuckling the steering wheel, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is not who I am. I can't do that to my dad. I'm not a killer. So
I know,
but I did have that.
Then you feel like defeated, right? Because you didn't do it.
Yeah. And I think that anybody that experiences, grief and loss, you do have those feelings of, your own. I had suicidal thoughts and I had homicidal thoughts. I think if I'm honest, a lot of people have felt the same thing. It's hard when you're so knee deep in grief.
How sickened were you when you saw people celebrating the verdict, like where people were actually happy? That had to be the toughest moment. You were sitting in the courtroom when they said not guilty, right?
Yeah. And I remember I remember, I can't tell you at the time if I remember seeing it because I've seen so much footage, his family cheering, and I get that. And Johnny Cochran leaning over and smiling and going, gotcha.
Got you to you?
Got you to you?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, like he did one of those. And I just, there was a lot going on. The jury was still in there, and
boy, that's a scumbag move.
Yeah.
This is not a sporting event.
Mm-hmm.
He looks at you and says, "Gotcha."
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. I've wrestled with this for 25 years, that my heart and my mind don't always align. There's lots of times where I know logically something makes sense, but then my heart says, no, I don't need it to. And so this is one of the situations where I understand that you're entitled to a defense. You're entitled to have the best possible defense that you can afford.
You believe in that.
And I get that. He got that. I just don't have to appreciate it, like it, respect it. And I think that what they did was beyond reproach, and the way that they handled themselves was disgusting, and that was kind of like the tip of the iceberg.
Who do you